Hello everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all, and today I want to talk about finding your core or kernel kink. That is the primary kink that describes why you do what you do. And I think this idea is so important, especially if you're struggling with understanding where you should go with your kink journey, or you just don't know how to describe to your partners or potential partners how you want to feel during scenes. So let's talk about it. And first of all, I do want to give credit where credit is due. This idea originally came from Princess Callie, who is a great educator. You should definitely check out her work, especially if you are into female-led relationships or findom at all. She is really my go-to resource on both of those topics. And I actually learned about this from her during one of her classes at a convention the other year, and it was a great conversation. I'd never heard of the idea before, and I loved it, and I wanted to make sure more people knew about it. Not just because I thought it would be a good idea for other people, but also it did make a big difference in my own kink journey and helped me communicate with my partners in a new way that I didn't previously have tools to do. And so with that, what exactly is a kernel kink? And the direct definition from Princess Callie is this: a kernel kink is the specific feeling you and your partners are seeking to achieve through play. This helps us reorient our experiences to be around emotions and mental states, rather than just about purely physical runs. And do not get me wrong, there is nothing that is the matter with playing physically. If that's your bag, more power to you. Lots of people, maybe even the majority of people, play on a physical, it's fun, I'm enjoying this kind of level, and they may not have a more complicated mental relationship to their kink. But I find that for people that are into power exchange, people that are into more psychological kinks and role play, they tend to be people who really want to have and need to have a deeper understanding of why they do what they do in order to have a fully enjoyable experience. And this can also be something that helps people bridge the gap between what their fantasy landscape looks like and then actually making something into reality. And the truth is, when it comes to kink education, we are typically pretty focused on just the purely physical side. We do not really talk about the mental state, and we historically especially did not. And when we do talk about the more mental and emotional state, it really only comes up with types of play that we associate with that. So things like fear play, humiliation, and so on, where even when we're talking about the emotions, it's in a very almost surface level way of like, okay, fear play is this, how do we get you to feel fear? That's not really what core kinks are about. It's about going beyond understanding, I like to feel afraid, and getting down to, okay, what flavor of afraid do you want to feel? How do you want to feel about your partner? What does that dynamic feel like? That's really where we get into, I think, the deeper and richer part of kink. And I think even if you are someone that does play on a more physical side, if you are very much a sadist or a masochist, or you like really intense physical sensations for whatever reason or whatever label you put on it, I think even then, having an emotional grounding to what you do can unlock a different level of play. Like, especially if you are reaching maybe a little bit of a ceiling with the intensity that you can get to just from physical experiences, if those really aren't satisfying you the way that they originally did, it might be because now's a good time to dig into that deeper emotional level. Oftentimes people who are newer to kink, the emotions that they're experiencing while they're playing that fuel the enjoyment of the scenes are the excitement and the novelty and the taboo. And once that wears away, because it has become normalized and it doesn't feel as this like really, wild new thing that you're doing anymore, in order to get the same like rush or like feeling that you would have gotten, like the level of feeling you would have gotten from those newer experiences later on your kink journey, finding newer emotions to connect to more deeply in your scenes can help it maybe not necessarily feel like it did when you first started, because I don't think we really need to like prioritize recreating the first time or something like that. I think it's kind of like a silly goal, to just be totally honest with you. But I think it can make it, like, maybe if you found that it like has dropped off in excitement level, it can make it exciting and enjoyable similarly, I think. But the point being is that with kink education being the way that it generally has been over the years, is we talk about activities in a very activity-centric way, right? It's what you're doing. It's like, okay, we're going to use an implement. Which one? How hard? How long? So on and so on and so on. It's very much like the what's of the scene. And it's really easy to get lost in the details of, okay, we're going to do a bondage scene in this position, and then do this, and then do this transition, and then we're going to hit you with this thing. And even if all of those things are totally your kink, they might not feel right in the moment. And you can be stuck wondering why. Is it you? Is it your partner? Is kink maybe not really your thing now that the new shiny smell has worn off? And while it could totally be the case that you're dealing with an energy mismatch, or maybe you need to reevaluate your scene activity selections, oftentimes the issue can come from us not understanding why we want to do things, not what you want to do. Kernel kinks can help clarify this and help this problem from coming up in future relationships. And I realize I've mentioned so far, like, a kernel kink in general is this core emotional experience that we want to have. But what exactly can be a kernel kink? Like, how do people describe their kernel kinks? And I would say some common examples of this would be loss of control, feeling small, being cherished, being worthless, feeling powerful, devotion, feeling transgressive or taboo, self-expression, and so on and so on and so on. I wouldn't say that there's a definitive list of like, these are all the core kinks that you can have, these are all the kernel kinks that you can have, but I think that for a lot of people, they're going to have a very individual experience of what their core kink is. So it's actually a little bit difficult for me to say in the abstract, like, here's a bunch of kernel kinks. It's more about understanding the concept and then discovering the language for yourself and then communicating with people using that language. And so I'll give an example from my own life of what my kernel kink is. And this is the reason why talking about this subject is so important to me. So my kernel kink is something that I'm super into, like, telling more people about. And it's this thing called circlusion, which is essentially this idea of being able to contain every part of my partner, the good and the bad, and the parts of themselves that they don't really like or are scared of, and their desires, and the squishy bits, and the feelings, and just like everything. To me, it is the act of surrounding rather than being acted upon, and that feels like a positive and empowered headspace for me where I have permission to be an active participant in my surrender rather than merely a body that's being acted on or someone who is forced into compliance. It feels nurturing and giving in a way that I can directly channel into my submission, whether it's through service or even CNC. And now that I know this term, I've been able to go back and use it as a base framework when trying to figure out what I want from a relationship or how I want to go about something. It helps me see the emotional threads I can work with, if that makes sense. Like if my partner comes to me and they want help with, say, researching a new credit card option that has the best point system for travel, I can see that my motivation there is not just like being helpful, but rather making space for and accepting the part of them that gets overwhelmed making choices like this. And because I care about them, I can take that burden on for them and relieve them in a way. And to me, that just makes those experiences so much more meaningful and more bonding, because then I'm not just going by rote of like, this is what a service sub does, or I'm just following orders, or I'm just helping them be happy. It helps me tap into a deeper emotional experience that makes things like service submission a lot more durable over the long term. Like I'm not just wearing myself out thinking about doing things only in like a selfless way. Like that's actually an interesting component of this for service submission in particular, is I think with service submission, we have a tendency to think in a selfless way of like, I'm doing this to be helpful. I'm doing this to relieve burdens for my partner. I'm doing this to not think about myself and just be, totally giving to somebody. And I think those are fine motivations, and those could also be kernel kinks for people, but at least in my personal experience, it sometimes can go deeper. And if I know that my motivations are a layer underneath that, it helps me reframe what my service submission is about, and helps me understand that I am also getting something out of doing this too, and that also helps me advocate for myself and my needs and my boundaries in a relationship too, versus just merely being acted upon. And so this really just helps, I think, any kink activity not become drudgery over the long haul. And not only was I able to use this understanding with service submission, I was also able to apply it to CNC, which has not historically been something that I've super been drawn to, but I was able to sort of rethink my appreciation for this kink when I was able to understand, okay, my desire for CNC doesn't come from a desire for roughness or physical force or fear, but it comes from a place of wanting to hold my partners and their dark parts and their scary parts and the parts that they are still working through, and that by allowing them to express those maybe uncomfortable things towards me and hold space for it and allow it and accept it, I'm sort of helping them accept themselves. And then, I don't know, it just gives me it's hard to describe, but it gives me a really warm, glowy, gold feeling in my chest, and it just feels really right. If I'm tapping into that headspace, especially intentionally while something is happening, and I'm very conscious of this sort of vessel-like role that I'm playing in a scene, that is so much more rewarding to me than merely being no, stop, please don't, in the way that I think a lot of people conceive of CNC. And one thing I will say that is different than how I think a lot of people can discover their kernel kinks is first of all, I didn't know about kernel kinks when I found out about this sort of underlying interest. I had the term for my kernel kink first, which is, again, circlusion, and then I realized, oh, this is the term for what that thing is. So it was kind of swapped a little bit, but I realized what circlusion was because I was reading something totally unrelated about radical feminists, and I somehow came across this blog that brought it up as a term, as sort of an alternative way of explaining heterosexual dynamics and sort of maybe a healthier way of thinking about penetration. And I was oh wait, I can totally apply this in a kink way. And this applies to me specifically. Let me tell other people about it. Sometimes even just seeing the right word can make those, light bulbs go off, and you can realize, oh my gosh, this is the thing that explains everything. And it took me 10 years in the scene to get there. So don't feel like you gotta rush. It can be a process. And I think it can also evolve over time. I don't think a kernel kink has to be the be-all end-all for your whole journey forever. I think what your core or kernel kink is can evolve as your kink journey evolves. So check in on it regularly. But I think as you get more experience, it does get more solid and does have more longevity. So that is how I discovered my kernel kink. How did you discover your kernel kink if you're not sure what it is? I think number one recommendation in general for a lot of things is reflect on your fantasy content. Reflect on scenes that you've done and ones that have felt really powerful or impactful or made you feel really good. How did you feel in the moment? What was your dynamic with your play partner? How did you feel about them? What kind of role play were you doing? What were the context around that scene? What sort of adult content do you enjoy too is another question. And are there common threads between these things that you can sort of tease apart and then see, okay, here's a correlation here, here's a correlation here. I think here's something that I'm noticing over and over and over again that show up in my largely positive experiences that I feel really, really good in. Also, looking at something like a feelings wheel or a values list can be helpful, again, for spotting that language. I think the more granular, the better with this. Get the biggest effing feeling wheel you can possibly find. And that can really help you just identify things that maybe you hadn't thought of before. For example, you might know that you like being afraid, but if you dig down, is that more of a helpless afraid or a frightened afraid? things like free association or word clouds or other creative exercises like collages can also be helpful here too. And I think, how do you know when you find your kernel kink? I think that's a little bit subjective. Like, I can't tell you, like, it's after doing 3 steps of this or whatever. But I think it's about, like, finding the bottom. Like, keep asking questions of, like, is there more? Is there more? Is there more? Get more and more specific. And when you find you cannot get any more specific, you've probably found your core kernel kink identity, and then you found a couple layers above that too that I think broadly give you a good range to play in that you can be fairly confident are going to work for you. Now, if your partner is the one who is struggling with figuring out their kernel kink, maybe you have had issues with them being able to tell you what they want, or they don't seem to know how to react during scenes, or they can't like describe their motivations for your relationship. They just like don't know. They're not contributing to the relationship in that way. These are some things that I think you can do to help them with that process, because it can be difficult for some people. And if you're the Dom, it can even be a task you can give them. So that's 2 birds with 1 stone on that. And so if they are struggling with figuring out what they like and they don't like, sometimes guided questions can be helpful. So ask them to go back to a scene or activity that they really enjoy. Tell them to write it out. Ask if they would like to experience that again. Ask them to describe how it felt in their body in the moment. See if they can put a label on that feeling in their body. Like, I described one of my feelings as like being golden or gold. So like, it doesn't have to be like, I felt sad, I felt happy. Like, think of like the texture of the feelings. Think of like physical things that kind of manifest along the feelings. Like, it feels like heavy. Is it soft? Is it like, what texture does the emotion have? And then as you're thinking about that, okay, it's a heavy feeling and it's cloudy. Like, okay, is that like sad? Do you want to have like emotional catharsis during your scenes? And then ask them questions along that. Again, getting like more and more progressively narrow as you go through the questions, trying to get to discover what that kernel kink is at the very bottom. And if they are still having trouble putting a particular label on something, again, going back to a feelings wheel or word cloud exercise can be important. And just rinse and repeat that for a couple of times, and you might find a pattern that helps you identify, okay, this seems to be the desired emotion, and these seem to be the things that provoke that desired emotion. And if someone is like less of a verbal person and they're more visual, you can do things like ask them for pictures or doodles or drawings or something similar to that that might help. Heck, you can even ask them to liken it to a particular type of weather or room decor. Just something to get the ball rolling of trying to get a sense of the vibe. And then once you have a broad stroke of the vibe, you can get down into narrower strokes of the vibe, so to speak. And I think why it's important to know your kernel kink is because it provides you really important information about compatibility. So the earlier you can talk about this in a relationship, I think the better in terms of evaluating, like, okay, should we just be play partners? Do we have enough overlap to maybe be in a DS relationship together? And to make sure you're not both wasting time and energy on scenes that aren't really going to fulfill you. Because you can do like a service topping, service bottoming thing where you are just doing something for meeting other people's needs. But unless your kernel kink has something to do with like selfless giving, for most people, that's not going to be sustainable, especially as like a monogamous relationship while trying to be kinky. Having the ability to have overlap there is going to make the process a lot smoother. But it can also, even if you are compatible, help you have less stress and guesswork while you're planning scenes or while coming up with play scenarios too. It doesn't all have to be like intense, emotional mumbo jumbo like I just went into. It can also mean you have information to make choices like, what should I wear? What should I make them wear? Or should I use my drill sergeant voice or my nice librarian voice? If you know that your partner's kernel kink is like loss of control, for example, you know that it would probably be hotter for them to have no say in what either one of you wear, and that you should dress for your own pleasure and not theirs. You also know from a combination of this knowledge and probably some previous experience that using your harsh drill sergeant voice is more likely to make them melt into a puddle than the librarian voice is. So you really get the ability to take advantage of more information here. And I really do think that kernel kinks are one more tool in your toolkit. And when you have more tools, when you have more communication, you can have better scenes with less mental effort in the moment. So work smarter and not harder is what I would say on this. And it does take more work up front. Like, that's part of the reason why people can shy away from things like negotiation, like conversations, because it can be a lot of labor just to get to like one scene, right? But if you're looking for longer term, better, closer to your fantasy type experiences, doing more work up front is going to help you get there. And then as you get further into your journey, you're going to have less bumpy spots in the road because you've already had those conversations ahead of time at a deeper level than the vast majority of people will have ever done. But keep in mind, this is not going to be an overnight change just because you talk about this one time with a person. You will need to work out through trial and error and more communication which things provoke which responses. Doing things like creating mood boards, vision boards, again, word clouds, collages, things that sort of bring out the feelings you want to experience or the mood you want to set is helpful. Like, have you guys ever seen those people who will post something on Reddit that's like, I want a perfume that smells like this, and they don't know what notes they like or anything, and then they put together a little 3-photo collage of a dark rainy forest and an old Scottish castle and like a warm pair of woolen mittens or something, and then people will pop out of the woodwork to be like, oh, try this and this and this. It sounds like you'd like this, or this could be up your alley, or you like this kind of perfume, or you probably wouldn't like this. And it's like, oh, thank you, I crowdsourced an answer. That's so amazing. Now I have more language to understand what I want when all I had before were like vague generalities. So making this a group effort with your partner can also help you when you're like, I know, I kind of want the visuals of this. This is the vibe I'm going for. Help me with language, please. Like, what does this mean? What does this bring up for you? It's sort of like ink blots. But if ink blots were cool. And it can also work in the opposite direction as well. Like, if you have a good sense of what underlying emotions you want to be experiencing, if you know what your kernel kink is, but you're not really sure how to make that a thing that actually happens, like, you can do the opposite of like, this is the vibe I want to have while wearing a perfume. Except in the case of kink, it might be more like when I say I want to feel this, or that this is my kernel kink, this is how it looks in my head. How do we make that into a physical thing that we do, right? Again, Scottish castle, rainy dark woods. How does that become a kink scenario? Because we're not renting a castle in Scotland. That's way too much money. How do we get there? I think this process can be really fun and really bonding because it lets you understand your partner on like such a deep level. And you have so many different mediums at your disposal in order to communicate this just based on what style works best for you. I think you can share book quotes or inspirational FetLife photos or video clips or GIFs or cut up pieces of magazines and newspapers. Like, really get creative with it. And I think by being creative, you will gain a greater understanding of yourself and your partner in the process. And I really do hope that you all give this a try. Just don't fall into the comparison trap when you're doing this. I think it's important when you're doing this process of discovering your kernel kink that you abandon any attachment on like what it has to look like. Like, when I first came across the concept of circlusion, I was really worried, like, oh my god, does this mean I'm like a dom or something? And I was like, I think about it, I was like, nah, no, it's like, it's maybe not the sort of like passive, servile type submissive presentation that I think we're used to, but it does give me power and agency in my own way, and I think a way that I've always wanted to have in my kink, but did not have language for, and that's okay. So when you're doing this, I think it's important to remove any expectations from your mind, get rid of any attachment to any particular outcome, really let it be authentic, because this is, like, please, authenticity and vulnerability are so important in kink. If you don't have those two things, you're just going to have a worse experience, especially in relationships. So this should be a process of really deep honesty with yourself and not making comparisons, not conforming to a stereotype. This should be a very freeing process of allowing yourself to go beyond, I identify as a brat, that means I'm into XYZ thing. Or I am a submissive, therefore I must act like or feel like whatever when this thing is going on, or I should react to my partner in this way. Get rid of all that. Just let it be its own thing. You're going to have a better time in the long run if you let go of those expectations. And with that being said, that is all I have to say about kernel or core kinks. I personally prefer the term core kink because the word kernel makes me think of corn, and I just it doesn't, it's just not language I like personally. I don't like saying the word kernel in my head. But that's what there is to know about core/kernel kinks. I would love to know in a comment down below what your kernel kink is, especially if you have recently discovered it, or how it's impacted your relationships or your kink journey. Or check back in later. Come back after you have discovered it for yourself using the steps in this video. Tell me what it is. Tell me what you discovered. I will also leave links to my video on circlusion if you would like to learn more about that one in particular, because I am very much trying to spread the gospel on that particular way of relating to kink. And with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. If you would like to, please do subscribe if you've not already, because I am so close to 300,000 subscribers. I don't normally ask for subscribers for reaching a goal, but 300,000 subscribers is in my head a pretty big deal. So I would love it if you could subscribe to me, and maybe we'll have even passed it by the time this video comes out, in which case give me a suggestion for what I should do to celebrate 300,000 subscribers, because it has definitely been a journey. And if you really want to support what I do, the best you can do is with Patreon, and to that will be down below. If you do already support me there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.